post, and of course he expresses his point of view. Considering the environment from the European direction that we now have, with which we have to deal, and the environment is very unconstructive, confrontational, militaristic, such concerns are completely justified.
Okay, Stephen Fish is Professor of Political Science at the University of California in Berkeley. He's also the author of Democracy Derailed in Russia, The Failure of Open Politics, joining us now. Thank you very much. Welcome to BBC News. So Mr. Medvedev is threatening the West. How worried should we be?
Not at all. First of all, Medvedev is not a man of great power. He's not taken seriously by most of the Russian elite. He has no following of his own. He is probably not in the top 1,000 people in Russia in terms of how powerful and influential he is. Putin uses him, Medvedev, to just kind of make these crazy statements sometimes and, be the kind of far crazy flank of Putin's messaging team. But we shouldn't take this all that seriously, not just because Medvedev doesn't have much authority, but because he makes statements like this all the time. Going back over the last few years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he has made these kinds of threats, including much more overt and aggressive nuclear threats than he just made over the last couple of days in the past. So I don't think this should be taken too seriously.
But ultimately, this would have been backed by the Kremlin.
Yes, but again, Putin allows Medvedev to make these crazy statements. It doesn't mean that they really reflect what Putin himself thinks. It's possible, of course, that Putin now feels under some pressure because for the last decade, he's had an American president, or when Trump was out of office, kind of leader of the Republican Party, who was entirely loyal to him. Trump has spent a great deal of his political career and national life sucking up to Putin. Putin was the one guy who you'd never even criticize. That's changed in recent months. It seems like Trump thinks perhaps now that Putin is getting in the way of a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And remember, for Trump, it's always about Trump. It's not about American interests. It's not about the interests of our allies. It's about Trump. What Trump wants is a Nobel Peace Prize. He's been very clear about that. The likelihood of him ever receiving a Nobel Prize is another matter. But he thinks now that Putin, by refusing to abide by any peace negotiation terms, is kind of getting in the way of that is Trump's dream of a Nobel Prize. So he's starting to stand up to Putin a bit. He hasn't applied really serious pressure to Putin. Even the tariffs that he threatened, he said won't go into effect at the earliest for 50 days. So Putin isn't feeling a lot of pressure from Trump, but it is unusual for Trump to stand up to Putin in this way, and Putin could be feeling the heat.
How are things going then for Mr. Putin at the moment?
Well, he's certainly completely in charge of Russia. He has no rivals. He has imposed a kind of neo-totalitarian regime in Russia. But the fact is, this war is not going the way he wanted it to. Russia's making small incremental, gains on the ground, but at absolutely enormous and possibly unsustainable costs. What's more, the Russian economy is not doing well. Putin has been able to use all kinds of tricks to hide the cost of this war to ordinary Russians. But the fact is that sustaining this war is very, very expensive for Russia. Europe now, perhaps the worst news of all for Russia, European leaders have taken a much more active interest in building up their own military capacity and aiding Ukraine themselves in the event that the Americans abandon Ukraine, and it's standing up to Putin. That's something Putin did not have to deal with until recently. But now with the likes of Chancellor Merz, as well as President Macron, Prime Minister Starmer, these people are all kind of seriously engaged now in supporting Ukraine. And that's something that Putin didn't really have to put up with until very recently.
Okay. Professor Stephen Fish, thank you for that. Thank you.
My pleasure.